There is an interesting Agada, a kind of a story that is brought in the Masechet Shabbat, the tractate dealing with Shabbat laws. And it says that there was a certain non-Jew who was passing by and heard how the verses from our weekly reading, Parshat Tetzaveh, are recited. The beautiful clothing that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would wear. Of course, the high priest had very complex clothing. There is a good reason why the Torah describes it in such great detail. There are a lot of allusions, various Kabbalistic secrets in them. The clothing of Kohen Gadol were very important, and it was, of course, part of the service. If the Kohen didn't wear the correct clothing, the whole service in the temple would be invalidated. His clothing, according to Zoharic literature, was represented, or rather was hinted by letters of two main divine names, the name that we don't pronounce, Yud Ke Bivav Ke, Havaya, and the name Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. So the 8 clothing pieces of clothes that he wore were connected those 8 letters. They actually would split into 4 and 4. There was a certain symmetry in that clothes. I once wrote actually an article in English, which I'm going to post below this video, where I describe, based on the writings of Shlah HaKadosh. This was many, many years ago that I wrote this. There was a certain Kabbalist, a very great sage, who lived in the land of Israel at the end of his life. This was about 500 years ago. And his name was Rabbi Yeshaya Horovitz. And he wrote a book called Shnei Luchot Abrit. They call it Shlah, abbreviation Shlah, Shnei Luchot Abrit, 2 tablets of covenant. And there are a lot of different aspects. It's not really even a book. You could call it a whole multi-volume, I guess, work. And there are many, many things that he discusses there. And among other things, he mentions the specific correspondence of these 8 types of clothes to the divine letters, and why, and what each one served as kapara for, what each one atoned for. I'm not going to go into this right now. I just want to continue the story. So there was a certain non-Jew who heard that the Kohen Gadol had such beautiful clothes, and he wanted to convert to Judaism because he also wants to wear clothes like that. That's what the story says. So he came to Shammai. Shammai and Hillel were the 2 greatest sages at that time, 2 leaders of the Jewish people. From them later came out 2 houses of study, what we call Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, the house of study of Shammai and the house of study of Hillel. And in that generation, this was close to 100 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. So we're talking about a few years before Common Era, this episode must have taken place. And this was the time, of course, when the Jewish people were constantly persecuted. The Romans had full control over us, and the puppet king that the Romans placed on top of us was an Edomite named Herod, Hordos. So this Herod, non-Jews call him Herod the Great. He was not great in anything. I mean, he built a lot, but a lot of times, of course, they call people great because they either conquered a lot, Alexander the Great, or Peter the Great, the Russian king. You know, if they built a lot, if they expanded the land, then they called great. But in our history, this Herod was remembered as a person who killed many, many different people, and he was horrible. He was a horrible monster. And he did build a lot, and he even renewed the temple at an advice of one of the sages, as the Talmud tells us. He actually did something for the Jewish people too. But mostly he promoted the forces of various Greeks and Romans and others who lived in the land of Israel at that time. So the former glory when the Hashmonaim won over the Syrian Greeks and had control over the country. The country was a Jewish country. That was going away, even though the majority of the population was still Jewish, but this was going away slowly from the time of Hordas and on, who killed all the Hashmonaim and made himself king with the Roman permission. And after that, it was basically all those predictions in Tochecha, in the rebuke of the Torah, that the foreigner among you will rise higher and higher and you'll go lower and lower. That's what was happening. So the Jewish people became foreigners in their own land, became the most discriminated group, the majority group, but it was the second-class citizen in their own land. And at that time, you'd imagine that a person who would want to convert to Judaism, they have to have a very good reason to convert to the religion of the nation that's so downtrodden and oppressed. Not a very logical thing to do. But this particular potential convert, when he heard that a Jew could wear such beautiful clothing, he decided he wants to convert to Judaism. At least that's how the story goes. So he comes to Shammai, and Shammai pushes him away, because of course nobody can become a priest. A person in Jewish law, a person is born. He has to be descendant of Aaron. So to become a high priest, you'd have to first be a priest. And to be a priest, to be a Kohen, you have to come from Aaron. You have to be a male descendant of Aaron. So, by the way, there was a study of DNA relatively recently, and they confirmed that something like 94% or 96% of today's Kohanim, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, doesn't matter. They all come from a common ancestor, something like 6 generations ago, or something like that. I don't remember the details. I'm sure you could find it on the web. So there is a definitely good reason to believe that the Kohanim kept their lineage to a very large extent, a very high percentage. You can't, of course, be guaranteed 100% you won't get, but it's very, very high percentage of people who call themselves Kohanim do come from a common male ancestor. Almost every Jewish community has some Kohanim. You come to a typical synagogue, there's usually 1 or 2 people who are Kohens. If it's a big synagogue, there are more Kohanim. Today, the Kohanim don't really differ from the rest of us. Some of them have, by the way, typical Kohanim last name. Their last name may be Cohen or Katz. Katz means Cohen Tzedek, it's an abbreviation. Or other types of last names like that. Kagan, Kaganovich, Kuinov among Bukharian Jews. So a lot of them have last names that point to their descent from Kohens. But a lot of them have other last names as well. At any rate, the only people who can become high priests, of course, there's only one high priest, and he can come only from Kohanim. So a Ger cannot become a Kohen, and just like any other Jew, I'm not a Kohen, and I cannot become a Kohen if I wanted to. There are religions where any person can become a priest, but in Judaism, any person can become a rabbi, but a priest is a specific group of people that come from Aaron. So Shammai basically pushed this guy away. So he came to Hillel, who was known to be meek and humble and very kind individual, and Hillel accepted him. And after this person converted and started learning, he realized, of course, that he cannot become a Kohen. Moreover, even a regular Jew cannot become a Kohen. Nobody can serve in the temple except Kohanim, who are descendants of Aaron. So why am I telling the story now? Of course, the reason I thought of the story now is because of the weekly Parsha, where we read about the Kohen Gadol's clothing. But the real reason I wanted to discuss now the whole issue of Gerim. Now, in the old times, it was relatively easy to convert in a certain sense. In a sense, it was hard because the Jewish people didn't have any other advantages in most cases. To become a Jew, you wouldn't get anything for it. Right? We were downtrodden. You wouldn't get the citizenship of Israel, for instance, in potential things like that. So conversion was very rare. Of course, in the later times when we were exiled in Christian and Muslim nations, conversion was usually prohibited under the penalty of death. Those non-Jews who wanted to convert, they would simply be executed, both in Christian and Muslim lands. In fact, in a lot of cases, it would be the opposite. The Jews would be forced to convert. There were a lot of forced conversions, both in Muslim and Christian lands. Very common, unfortunately. In some cases later, they were able to come back, either leave the country where there was persecution, or maybe if the evil decree would be taken back. So there were some Jews who were able to come back in certain cases, but in a lot of cases, unfortunately, these people were lost forever from our nation. Many people died also. Many people actually did give up their life in order to not convert to a different faith. There were also cases when for generations people would live as pretending to belong to a different religion, but trying to practice at least whatever commandments they could. Of course, the case of Moranas is well known. The Jews in Spain who were converted to Christianity, and they were trying to keep certain Jewish commandments. Whenever the Christian church would find out, they would just burn them at stake for this. Whatever the case may be, given that throughout most of our history there were very, very few conversions to Judaism, and generally it was a great sakana, a great danger, or at the very least there was not much to gain to convert to Judaism. So all the conversions were generally altruistic, and therefore, as we say among programmers, I also work as a programmer, it's not a bug, it's a feature. So there was something positive about it too, because that meant that the people who are converting to Judaism generally sincerely want to be Jewish for religious reasons, not for any other benefits they might get. Even in the case of this convert that Hillel accepted, the Tosafot explains that he knew that eventually this person will realize, right, that his conversion was in fact, to a large extent, Lishem Shemaim too. Okay, he was attracted to the Kohen Gadol's clothing, but in the end of the day, Hillel, after talking to him, presumably understood that this is a good potential convert and accepted him. But generally, most of the converts in those times, they risked a lot and gained very little or nothing. And therefore, it was relatively easy to convert to Judaism. If a person wanted, generally, we do not encourage anybody to convert to Judaism. The opposite. If a person comes and says they want to convert, we tell them, why do you need this? You could be righteous, non-Jew, and you'll have a share in the world to come. Why do you need to convert? But if a person insists, after a couple of times, we do accept him. So this was all in the good old times, or bad old times, rather. In our day, of course, to be a Jew can mean all kinds of benefits. For example, being able to move to Israel and get Israeli citizenship and all kinds of other things. I mean, today there is no major discrimination, at least not as much as it used to be. And therefore, the rabbis made it a lot harder to convert. Today, this procedure of Orthodox conversion usually takes a couple of years, and a person tries to live a Jewish life and more or less observe most of the commandments and see if they really want to stay. If they really insist after a couple of years that they do want to convert, and after all this learning, then they accept it. That's the most common way of conversion today. The accepted, more or less, consensus of the rabbis is to convert is today a lot harder than it used to be. But at any rate, the simple law of the Talmud is that once a person converts sincerely, there is no way to go back. There's no such thing as revoking a conversion. If that person becomes irreligious, okay, so they're now a bad Jew in a sense, a sinful Jew, but they're not a non-Jew anymore. There's no way to revoke a conversion in Judaism. So that's what's surprising, is that really in the last few years, it's really a very new phenomenon, that there are certain rabbis in certain cases that try to revoke a conversion. What kind of a thing is that? Never heard such a thing, right? It's very clear in Jewish law and in the Talmud that once a person converts, there's no way to go back. If a person originally did not convert correctly, then there are already different situations. Maybe the original conversion was wrong to begin with. For instance, he deceived the rabbis, he never really wanted to practice Judaism. Even then it's not so obvious, but at least there is something to discuss. But if a person at first converted and wanted to keep the commandments, even if later, for various reasons, they become irreligious, so this is just like any Jew who is irreligious. They cannot be non-Jewish anymore. Once they're Jewish, it's forever like that. And that's why it's a big surprise that certain rabbis use indiscriminately the idea of revoking at conversion, which has absolutely no precedent in classical Judaism. And certainly if a person converted correctly, there's no way to go back on it. And on this I'm going to end for today. If you like this video, please press like and please subscribe to our channel.